Hello, guys. How have you been? I want to apologize for not having a recent episode lately. I kind of got hurt, and I've had to deal with all the doctor appointments that stemmed from that. And then we also, where we live, we have this little thing that they call Thunder over Louisville. And it's this huge air show and fireworks. The planes fly right over my house, so it gets really, really loud. And it's not the best to try to record an episode, so I decided to just wait until it was over. But I wanted to talk to you about a story that's really been on my heart and mind a lot lately, and I really struggled with whether or not I should even record this one because our country has been seeing so much of this type of violence lately. But I decided I needed to do it. So today we're going to discuss Columbine. Warning. This episode contains graphic depictions of school violence. Viewer discretion is advised. A mass killing is defined as 3 or more victims, not including the assailant, in a single incident. So most younger people today probably have no idea what anyone is talking about when they say, "Oh, do you remember Columbine?" They don't realize that they've probably seen videos from the media revolving around that. So on April 20th, 1999, I was about 13. And I remember quite a bit. I remember seeing the students and teachers coming out of the school, and I remember the boy falling out of the window and trying to get to safety. And it's all still fairly vivid. And that could be because, I had to research it to get all the facts, but it still resonates. But we're going to start with a little backstory. Eric David Harris was born April 9th, 1981 in Wichita, Kansas. Eric was born with pectus excavatum, which means his breastbone sunk into his chest. He had 2 cosmetic surgeries to correct that, but it was still pretty prominent during his autopsy. His father was in the U.S. Air Force, and he retired in 1992, and that's when the family settled in Littleton, Colorado. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born September 11th, 1981 in Lakewood, Colorado. Dylan was raised in the Lutheran Church, and he also celebrated his grandfather's Jewish ancestry. And Dylan was very intelligent, but he was also extremely shy and quiet. Eric and Dylan met in the 7th grade, and they became fast friends. And then Dylan introduced Brooks Brown to Eric, and Eric introduced Nathan Dykeman to Dylan, and they became this little clique. In high school, they worked at Blackjack Pizza together, where Eric became a shift leader while Dylan was a cook. And people who knew Eric said he was very charismatic and friendly and nice. The events that follow were rather shocking to both families and friends. On the morning of April 20th, 1999, Eric and Dylan skipped their morning classes. The two high school seniors arrived in separate cars, parked in separate lots. At 11:10, Eric was met by friend Brooks Brown in the parking lot, and Brooks was picking on him for missing a test because that was something that Eric never did. Eric responded with, "It doesn't matter anymore. I like you now, Brooks. Get out of here. Go home." Brooks then left the school at that point because he felt uneasy. At 11:19, the first shots were fired outside the school. The first victim was 17-year-old Rachel Scott, who was shot 4 times. By 11:35 a.m., 12 students had been shot and killed, with 24 being seriously injured. By 12:08, Eric and Dylan had committed suicide. While this was, at the time, the worst school shooting, it didn't happen the way it was supposed to. Eric and Dylan had planned for this to be even bigger than the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. They wanted chaos and death and devastation. And they didn't care how they had to get it, and they didn't care who got hurt in the process. So they planted 2 duffel bags in the cafeteria that had propane bombs in them. They set them to detonate at 11:17 a.m., which would be the busiest lunchtime. Had they exploded, it would have killed or severely injured some 488 students having lunch at that time. It also would have ruined the school's infrastructure, causing the library to collapse onto the cafeteria directly below. With the propane bombs alone, we would have been looking at a death toll of 600 or more. As any survivors ran, they planned to shoot, stab, and throw pipe bombs at them. After this, they had their cars rigged with pipe bombs and propane bombs. They were set to detonate around 11:40, taking out as many survivors, reporters, and rescuers as possible. However, they were unable to get the timers to work properly, so that's why the bombs didn't go off. And during the investigation, it was discovered in their journals that they had been planning the entire event for at least a year. These were both very, very intelligent boys, and they were cunning, especially Eric. And this was well thought out and well planned. It was just the execution was poor. Originally, it was believed that movies, music, and video games were behind the violence. It would turn out to be untrue. Psychologists would posthumously diagnose Eric as a clinical psychopath. Now, we as a society, we tend to lump all killers into the psychopath category. But as it turns out, it's a very specific mental condition that rarely ever involves killing. And according to Dr. Robert Hare, and this is a quote, psychopaths are not disoriented or out of touch with reality, nor do they experience the delusions, hallucinations, or intense subjective distress that characterize most other mental disorders. Unlike psychotic individuals, psychopaths are rational and aware of what they are doing and why. Their behavior is the result of choice freely exercised. Which means that Eric knew exactly what he was doing when he was planning this. Eric Harris had a superiority complex and wanted to punish the human race for their ignorance and inferiority. He had no remorse, no empathy. On the outside, he was a sweet-faced, well-spoken young man, while inside he was cold, calculating, and homicidal. Dylan, on the other hand, was hot-headed, depressed, and suicidal. Complete opposite. He blamed himself for all of his problems. Because of this, the two complemented each other due to the different motives and mental conditions. Psychologists believe that Dylan could have gone on to live a perfectly normal life had he gotten proper help. Eric, on the other hand, they believe was a lost cause. At 18, he was already a brilliant killer without a conscience. And he was looking for the worst scheme imaginable. Had the massacre not happened, and he lived to adulthood and been able to cultivate his skills, there's no telling what kind of devastation he would have caused. Experts believe Columbine may have prevented something even worse from happening. When you look at the pictures and you see the videos of the students running and all the devastation from it, you're probably wondering, well, how could this be better than what we could have had? When you look at the numbers that they were actually wanting, they wanted to kill everybody in that school. Had they done everything properly, it would have happened. And that's from a 17 and 18-year-old. That's a scary thought. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably wondering, well, where in the world would they get guns for this? Where would they get any of this stuff? Because at the beginning of the year, Eric was 17 years old. When Columbine happened, he had just turned 18 years old. So where did they get these weapons? Two men, one that they worked with, purchased guns for them and sold them the weapons and the ammunition. They were both convicted of supplying a handgun to a minor. One received a 6.5-year sentence. The other received only 4 years. That seems light to me. I feel like they should have been charged with 13 counts of accessory to murder, and then possibly even several hundred counts of attempted murder. But that's my opinion. And I think we've started to go a little bit harder on people when they do things this way. But I feel like there is no need for a minor to have a weapon. If you are supplying them with a weapon, they are planning on using it. What do they need that weapon for? Whether you knew or not, and you supplied that weapon to that child, because before the age of 18 to 21, they are still a child. You supplied that child with a weapon, and that child then goes and hurts people. You are just as much at fault as that child, in my eyes. Again, my own opinion, but I digress. There was also a young lady that Dylan took to prom, which was 3 days before Columbine. She purchased the shotguns and the carbine rifle for them. Now, she never did any time because she cooperated during the investigation. Again, I feel like she should have done some time. Altogether, Eric and Dylan fired 188 rounds of ammunition, with Eric firing nearly twice as many times as Dylan. Dylan only fired 67 rounds. Law enforcement fired an additional 144 rounds of ammunition. Guys, I've seen the pictures. I would not want to be the ballistics expert for this case, because I've seen those crime scene photos, and I know all those flags, and those flags show where all the shots landed, and you have to trace the trajectory, and it was insane just on the outside of the building, seeing all of those flags, because you have the yellow, which is from Dylan and Eric, and then you have the red, which was from, I believe, the police. And they intermingled so much that it was confusing for me. I just can't even, I don't know how ballistics experts did it. I really don't. So by noon, the shooting was pretty much over with. But the police didn't move into the building for several more hours. This would cause at least one victim to bleed to death. By the time all was said and done, 12 students and 1 teacher lost their lives that day. Rachel Scott, 17. Daniel Rohrbaugh, 15. Cassie Bernal, 17. Stephen Kernall, 14. Corey DePuter, 17. Kelly Fleming, 16. Matthew Kechter, 16. Daniel Mauser, 15. William Dave Sanders, 47. Isaiah Scholes, 18. John Tomlin, 16. Lauren Townsend, 18. And Kyle Velasquez, 16. Today in Littleton, Colorado, the Columbine Memorial stands in dedication to the 13 victims of the shooting. It was dedicated on September 21st, 2007. This mass shooting changed the way the press was allowed to release information, the way police departments handled active shooter situations, and also the way schools handled pretty much everything. At the time that Columbine happened, The press was actually able to air everything in real time as it happened. Now we have I think it's like a 5-second lapse. And that ensures that people are not seeing something that they shouldn't see. Most schools, high schools in particular, went to having metal detectors and resource officers on staff. Statistically speaking, 96% of all mass murderers are men. 52% are white. And in 66% of the cases, the weapons are legally obtained. Also, in most cases, oddly enough, it's not your typical AK-47 or AR-15 we hear about on the news. It's a handgun that's the weapon of choice. Just a little food for thought. I had never actually looked the statistics up, so I thought I would put them out there in case you guys hadn't either, because I found them interesting. I really did. Excuse me. But guys, I appreciate you letting me chat about this one. I know it's really heavy, but it was just, I couldn't move on. I needed to get this one off me. So next episode, I promise it won't be so long and heavy. But yeah, we've had a lot of this going on, and I wanted you guys to remember that it's not something new. This is something that we've been dealing with off and on since, I think, the 40s. So, guys, make sure you follow me on Facebook and Instagram at True Crime and Whatnot, and let me know how I'm doing. And I'm still learning all of this, so if you have a suggestion for a story, feel free to let me know. Till next time, stay true and whatnot.